Oh, hi there. Much like anyone sitting in his lounge reading year-old newspapers, I didn't see you come in. Please don't kill me. Since you're here, I'd like to share with you my thoughts on Dark Souls, while I definitely don't text the cops. Sound good? Good. Dark Souls is one of those games that, regardless of whether or not you've played it, it evokes a very particular image in the minds of gamers. Much like many of the pillars of gaming, such as Mario or Half-Life, the Dark Souls series has become ingrained in how we as gamers see the industry as a whole. In a few short years, it has solidified itself as an icon, a symbol of the hardcore aspects of games, with minimal hand-holding and infinite trial and error. So, having just recently completed my first playthrough of Dark Souls, I thought I'd share my thoughts on it and its various components to try and figure out what makes the game so compelling and unique in a very crowded ocean of games. If you're new to the channel, you can watch my journey from the beginning in my blind playthrough of the game. It was a lot of fun, and I'm sure you'll find equal parts enjoyment and fury from checking it out. But enough plugging, let's get to the game. And of course, if you haven't played it yourself, there are spoilers ahead. Dark Souls is famous, or perhaps infamous depending on your stance, for having very little plot within the game, while maintaining a deep yet subtle lore. The goal of the game is pretty simple from the word go. Defeat Gwyn and his circle of top minions, and save the first flame of the world from fading. And even that is pretty obscure. In fact, most of the lore for the game is either hinted at by NPCs, or is in the descriptions of items that you find around the world. To summarize the lore, the world was once ruled over by the immortal dragons, until the Lord's souls were discovered by Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, Nito, the First of the Dead, the Witch of Izalith, and the Furtive Pygmy, a character who really doesn't appear in the game and is only hinted at. These four and their followers stage an uprising against the dragons, and with the help of Seath the Scaleless, a dragon who's seeking immortality, they destroy all of the immortal dragons, supposedly. This begins the Age of Fire, and the first sightings of the accursed Dark Sign, which is born by the undead. You, as the hero, are the chosen undead, destined to defeat Gwyn and restore the flame. That's a lot of story, and for better or worse, a lot of that comes from the intro cutscene. After that, however, there is surprisingly little in terms of straight-up storytelling. Items and characters will allude to events around you, but very little is done to tell you what exactly is changing. This is a two-sided coin, and likely a topic of hot debate between fans of the game. On the one hand, discovering your story and forging your own path is very rewarding. It gives the player a sense that they are in control of their own fate, and perhaps more importantly, it keeps them from guessing what is right around the corner. So many times I found myself awestruck by the next zone that I found myself in and the enemies that I encountered, and that's the benefit of not really knowing what's going on all the time. However, it does miss out on what I would likely consider to be my biggest complaint with Dark Souls, and that is the interaction with the world itself. Let me explain. The world itself is a dismal yet beautiful place. It's full of traps and monsters, it's fun to explore and to see. The problem is, there is very little in the way of meaningful interaction. Nearly all living things are enemies that attack you without any provocation. And the NPCs that you do find are not particularly talkative or really interesting. And for the most part, the world is pretty static. I consider Dark Souls to be an RPG, and while it doesn't follow a lot of the traditional formula that an RPG will typically have, I think that the player's impact on the world is something that could use improvement. Defeating a particularly harrowing boss may feel satisfying, but it doesn't change the world or the people outside of that boss chamber. There are plenty of arguments against this, most of which I'm sure are perfectly valid. For me, however, when I play games, particularly RPGs, I do it because I love to be a hero, and I want the world to transform around my actions. That being said, it is a very small complaint, and the lore of Dark Souls is incredibly interesting. Even now, weeks after finishing the game, I find myself going and looking up various characters and bosses, and even some items, just to find out how it ties the world together. And that's something that not too many games can boast. The biggest argument that I can see against my biggest criticism, however, is built right into the presentation. From Software goes out of its way to make you feel very powerless, and to an even greater extent, very alone. There are NPCs that talk to you in safer areas, and messages from players are boosts of encouragement from time to time, but the game is very solitary, and that serves the atmosphere in all the right ways. It seems contradictory to my last argument, and perhaps to an extent it is, but it's hard to deny the beauty of the environments and the fear of turning around a corner when you feel so very alone. Dark Souls takes you from prisons to cities to forests and castles, even into the depths of a volcanic hellscape. There is no shortage of varied environments, and they never feel boring. Anytime that I started to grow weary of one area, a new one would appear, and each one felt separate and unique from its counterparts, with expert use of color and shadow. When it comes to variety, however, the enemies of the game are what really steal the show, particularly the bosses. While nearly each major boss is unique, there are some particularly cool standouts, such as the Gaping Dragon, the Chaos Witch Quelaag, and Sif, the Great Wolf. That's not even mentioning the outstanding boss fights from the DLC, the Black Dragon Calamite, Manus, Lord of the Abyss, and my personal favorite boss from the game, Knight Artorias. It's this variety in both the environments and the impressive roster of bosses and enemies that gives Dark Souls such incredible replay value. And no matter how many times you go wandering around the world, you'll still find new and beautiful things that you hadn't discovered. When it comes down to it, it doesn't matter how good the story is or how pretty the world looks. There are untold numbers of games that collect dust on store shelves despite looking incredible. In the world of video games, it should come as no surprise that ultimately, gameplay is king. This can be achieved in different ways with different games, but I'll simplify it by separating it into two categories that I think are important: depth and reward. Let me explain what I mean by these. Depth is how I describe the systems in place, the mechanical, logical side of a game that helps add variety to situations. The more depth a game has, the more directions it can go. A good example of a very deep game would be Civilization. There are a number of intricate systems that are running beneath the game, from factions and diplomacy to maps and resources. Reward is the other side of the coin. It's less about the big ideas and more about how you feel in the moment. It's also a tougher one to quantify, as different people get a sense of reward and fun in different ways. But when I think of reward, one series that always comes to mind first is Zelda. Reward is the feeling that you get when you see a chest across the room. It's the spark of figuring out the answer to a puzzle, and the excitement of opening that chest to see what treasure it hides. So what do these have to do with each other, and how does it relate to Dark Souls? Well, to put it simply, when you utilize a game's depth, you reap the rewards. And Dark Souls does this in spades. There are numerous styles of play. If you watched my playthrough, you'll know that I used a very fast, dexterous build. But you can be heavy with two-handed swords and clubs. You can use magic, or you can incinerate enemies with fire. There is an insane amount of choice in place, with each weapon type utilizing very carefully timed movesets. And this is where Dark Souls' depth comes into play, and where learning to master the various styles can give the player reward, with the greatest rewards coming in the form of defeating gigantic bosses. I'll use the tutorial stage as an example. the part of the game with the quote-unquote least depth. You begin in your cell with nothing but a broken blade. You leave your cell to find a number of unarmed enemies. It's a safe way to teach the player the most basic of game functions. Then immediately you fight your first boss, and he is big, he is ugly, and he will kill you fast if you do not book it out of that room. Then you get some other things, a shield, a longer sword, but that boss is still in the back of your mind. You have no idea how you're going to be able to defeat him. And then you come out right above him. You can take your time, you can stand there for minutes or hours or seconds, whichever you prefer, but in the end, all there is to do is jump down there and just hope and fight. It's a big step, but it's an important one. You fight, you learn his pattern, maybe you die a few times, but eventually you succeed. When you watch his corpse explode into what at the time feels like an incredible number of souls, that's when you learn why we play Dark Souls. The lore keeps us talking, the visuals keep us exploring, but at its heart, Dark Souls is just a really damn good game that knows how to punish its players, but far more importantly, knows how to teach them, and knows how to reward them. So I think it's apparent that I love this game, and I'm guessing if you're watching this, you do too, or that you at least have some vested interest in it. But so rarely do we ever sit back and think about why we love games. And I'd say that if you ever need a reminder, give Dark Souls a try. If you do, and you make videos of your first playthrough, drop a link below. and I'm sure many other people would love to share in your adventure. And if you have played it, try booting it up again. I'm willing to bet you'll be glad you did. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. To the folks that followed me through the game from the beginning, a big thank you. And if you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. I post lots of games on the channel here, including my full Dark Souls playthrough. I'm planning to do a playthrough of the sequel Dark Souls 2 as well, and eventually, I imagine the third one will be on the list. So if you like what you see, I'd love for you to stick around. I'm also about to start streaming on my new Twitch channel on weekends, so if you ever want to chat about games or Dark Souls or your favorite flavor of ice cream, stop on by. You can check out my Twitter account where I will post in advance when I'll be streaming. Well, that's all for me. Did I miss something? Get something wrong perhaps? Or maybe something hit home. I'd love to hear your thoughts below, but until then, you stay beautiful and stay tuned. I'll catch you later.